But first, what, if anything, will President Obama walk away from in this historic meeting? Indications so far suggest no major breakthroughs on the core economic issues like trade and currency manipulation. As for human rights abuses, both presidents answered questions on that contentious topic at the press conference earlier today. But it was President Hu's comments that raised eyebrows. Take a look.
China is a developing country with a huge population and also a developing country in a crucial stage of reform. In this context, China still faces many challenges in economic and social development, and a lot still needs to be done in China in terms of human rights.
That obviously was the voice of the interpreter, and that was indeed a surprising admission by the communist leader, one that probably didn't go nearly far enough for our next guest, who earlier today blasted the Chinese regime, and I quote, as the world's worst human rights abuser. Joining us from Washington, Republican Congressman Rohrabacher. Welcome.
Glad to be with you.
Congressman, I agree with you completely that the United States has to continuously push for human rights, but you used some pretty harsh language on China this morning. Is that the best way to start a state visit?
It certainly is. When you're talking to a gangster, if you treat him like a nice guy, he's not going to respect you at all. Our trouble is we've been dealing with these people as if they're Englishmen or Belgians or something like that, when in reality, this is a gangster regime that murders their own people and should be treated in that way, or they won't respect us.
Well, just to sort of set the record so that our audience can know what you're referring to, detail for us, if you would, what you think the most egregious human rights violations are by the Chinese government, and then also answer the question, has it gotten better or worse over the last 10, 15, 20 years?
Certainly. Now, let's take a look at China as compared to Russia, for example. There has been no reform in China, liberal reform at all. And what we've had, there's no freedom of speech, there's no freedom of press, there's no freedom of assembly. Now, in Russia, you have some of that now, and you have opposition newspapers and parties. There are no opposition parties in China. Anybody who sticks their head up in China is immediately thrown into prison. And worse than that, I think the worst part is, in Russia today, the former communist country, the churches are full. In China, what you have is an ongoing repression of religion. People like the Falun Gong, who are nothing more than people who believe in yoga and meditation, are being thrown into prison by the thousands, and there's sometimes, and there's all sorts of evidence suggesting that they are being beaten to death in order to steal their organs and sell their organs. Now, it doesn't get much more ghoulish than this.
I think we all agree that there are very significant and monstrous human rights violations in China that need to be dealt with. The question I would ask you is, have not presidents of both parties, Democrats and Republicans, going back now for 30 years, concluded that the best way to extend human rights in both China and Russia, and I'm not sure I agree with your characterization of what goes on in Russia these days, but have concluded that the best way to do this is to bring both countries into the international economic world, to permit technology and information to flow to those nations, and over time we will see a gradual increase in human rights in both Russia and China as a consequence?
That's absolutely wrong about Russia. We never had that theory with Russia at all. Our theory was to isolate Russia economically, and that's what worked. Our theory, you did just explain what the theory has been to China, and it has had just the opposite effect. What we have now is no more freedom in China. We've created a Frankenstein monster. We have built up their economy so they're prosperous, and they have wealth now and power, and they are going around the world making alliances with other criminal regimes. They are a threat because and the theory you just described does describe what the policy was. It's called hug a Nazi and make a liberal. Well, it doesn't work, hasn't worked with China, and it's now we're being threatened. Our prosperity is being undermined, and our security is being threatened.
Well, look, we can put the historical record with Russia aside for another day. What I want to do, you were a speechwriter for President Reagan, and what I want to do, and I, of course, don't know if you wrote the words that we have on a tape we're about to play for you, but what I want you to do is listen to these words from President Reagan, and then I want to ask you the obvious question, was President Reagan wrong to begin to engage the Chinese in a way that is remarkably similar in both tone and substance to what we see from President Obama today? Let's just listen to this tape first.
But what we have in common, what we can accomplish working and building together, is vastly more significant than those things that separate us. This, of course, does not mean progress will be easy. Few things worthwhile ever happen without commitment and effort by good people. We can be proud, considering our differences, of how much has already been accomplished. If you'll permit me, we believe even greater progress can be made if our future efforts are based on hu jing, hu wei, mutual respect and mutual benefit. If we have the will to live up to it, hu jing, hu wei can make our countries more prosperous and more secure.
Again, Congressman, I just want your response to that tape. And I guess the obvious question, was President Reagan also wrong in his decision to engage China and the Chinese government in the way that seems to be similar to what President Obama is doing?
All right. Well, first of all, let me let you know that I worked with the president on that very speech, as well as several of the other speeches that he gave in China on that visit to China. So I know those words very well. And I also know what you haven't shown your viewers, which is the context of other speeches that Reagan gave on that trip to China, as well as in the very speech that you're talking about. What we've got here is, yes, I agree with what you cut out. That is a portion of what Reagan believed in. But you also left out the part where Reagan made it very clear to the Chinese, and I know this because I worked with him on the other speeches as well, that our relationship would continue to expand as long as the liberalization continued in China, as long as more people were freer and there was more free interaction with the world and you had a liberalization going on. Reagan made that very clear because that was the point that I worked with the president on, that he wanted in his speeches. You haven't shown that part. But what happened at Tiananmen Square was, there was a liberalization, as Ronald Reagan is alluding to during that speech that you clipped. But what happened, it came to a head at Tiananmen Square. Unlike in Russia, where the Communist Party collapsed, the Communist Party slaughtered the democracy movement, and it's been getting worse ever since then. Reagan would have called off all of the favored nation status type of agreements that we have. He would have called them up and said, no more entry into our markets, no more loans, no more technology transfer if you slaughter the democracy movement. Our presidents since then have not been willing to make that stand, and Herbert Walker Bush set us on a horrible path towards the rebuilding of power in China, which is to our detriment.
First, Congressman, we did not mean in any way to clip out other parts of the speech that you think may be important. We'll get whatever we can get and post the whole thing on our website so everybody can see the entirety of it. We certainly want everybody.
By the way, it's not just that speech. He gave several speeches that I worked on in China that had that message.
On the human rights issue, of course, the United States, we depend on China for a whole range of issues, including trying to work with North Korea and Iran and beyond. And so aren't those also human rights issues that we have to work with China on?
Yeah, they are, and they're playing a horrible role. No, you think they're playing a positive role in North Korea?
Well,
that's a game. Think they're playing a positive role in Pakistan? These are the guys who've been behind the scenes proliferating nuclear weapons throughout the world and allying themselves with the murderers down in Darfur or Burma or throughout the world. They haven't been playing a positive role at all.
Well, no, I agree with you. They have not. And, of course, the goal is to try to get them to do that and to cooperate with us. And I'm just not sure.
If we treat them so nice, they're going to do that. You know, when you treat tough guys nicely, they don't understand it. They think you're weak. And that's the trouble with China, with the people who lead China today. They rule their country with an iron fist, and we're trying to reach out to them with an open hand. It doesn't work that way. That's not with how tough guys react. We're going to have progress. We've got to lay down the law and say, basically, to the Chinese people, we're on your side and not the side of your oppressors.
All right, Congressman Dana Rohrabacher, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Well, he was in a feisty